The photograph sat in its oak frame on the mantel unchanging, while everything around it had crumbled. Margaret Maggie Thompson picked it up with hands that trembled not from age, though she was 64, but from the weight of what she was about to do. In the photo, Daniel was 22, his Harvard Law School diploma clutched in both hands, his smile so wide it seemed to take up half his face. She remembered that day with crystalline clarity, the way the Boston Sun had caught the gold lettering on his degree, how his father Richard had wept openly unashamed, saying over and over, "That's my boy. That's my brilliant boy." "Mom, I'm going to make a difference," Daniel had told her that night over celebratory dinner at Legal Seafoods. His eyes had burned with purpose. "I'm going to defend people who can't defend themselves. I'm going to be the kind of lawyer Dad always hoped I'd be." And he had been. God help her, he had been. Maggie set the frame down and pulled out the yellowed newspaper clipping she'd kept folded in her Bible for 15 years. Charleston Post, June 2009, young attorney saves elderly woman's home in pro bono case. The article detailed how Daniel, just 3 years out of law school, had worked for 6 months without pay to help Mrs. Adeline Porter keep her house from predatory reverse mortgage scammers. She could still see Mrs. Porter's face on the courthouse steps, tears streaming, grabbing Daniel's hands. "You're an angel. A real-life angel." Daniel had brushed it off, uncomfortable with praise. "Just doing what's right, ma'am." What happened to that young man? When did what's right become so malleable? Maggie's fingers traced the edge of another photo, this one more recent. 5 years ago, Daniel, Richard, and herself at Magnolia Plantation during the azalea bloom. Richard's arm around their son's shoulders, pride radiating from both men. 6 months later, Richard would be dead from a massive coronary collapsing in his wood shop, while building the cradle for the grandchild he'd never meet, Daniel's daughter Sarah, who Maggie wouldn't learn about until years after the divorce, after everything had already begun to unravel. The morning they buried Richard Thompson, the sky over Charleston had been obscenely beautiful, cloudless, the kind of blue that hurt to look at. Maggie remembered thinking how wrong it was, how the world should have been gray and weeping. Daniel had given the eulogy, his voice steady until he reached the final lines. "My father taught me that a man's character is defined by how he treats those who can do nothing for him. Dad, I promise I'll make you proud." That night, Maggie found him in Richard's wood shop, that unfinished cradle before him, a bottle of Jefferson's Reserve bourbon, his father's favorite, already half empty. "Sweetheart," she'd said softly, standing in the doorway. "Come inside. It's late." Daniel didn't look up. "I should have been here. I should have been here when it happened. You were in court, defending that young mother in the custody case. Your father understood. He was proud of you. He's dead, Mom. Pride doesn't mean much now, does it?" She should have heard it then, the edge of something breaking beneath the grief, should have recognized the particular pitch of pain that can curdle into something darker. But she was drowning in her own loss, and so she'd simply put her arms around her son and let him cry into her shoulder, the smell of bourbon sharp between them. That was the first night. The first time she'd told herself, he's just grieving. He'll get better. This will pass. Over the next year, the bourbon became his companion. The bottle always Jefferson's Reserve, always his father's brand, as if the specific choice was some kind of penance or connection moved from occasional solace to nightly ritual to morning necessity. Maggie watched her brilliant son miss court dates, lose clients, show up disheveled to the office. The partners at Whitmore & Associates, Charleston's most prestigious civil law firm, had been patient at first. Everyone loved Daniel. Everyone understood loss. But patience has its limits. The day Daniel lost his job, Maggie was in her 3rd grade classroom at Charleston Day School, teaching fractions with apple slices when her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Whitmore himself, Mrs. Thompson. "I'm so sorry. We did everything we could." She'd known immediately what it meant. That evening, Daniel sat at her kitchen table. He still had his own apartment. Then a beautiful historic district loft he couldn't afford anymore, and told her with a kind of dead calm that made her stomach clench. "They said I was a liability. Me. After everything I brought to that firm." His laugh was bitter. 7 years, Mom. 7 years of 80-hour weeks. I made them millions. But I miss a few depositions, show up late a handful of times, and suddenly I'm expendable. Daniel, honey, maybe this is a sign. Maybe you need to take some time, get help. Help. His voice sharpened. "I don't need help. I need a job. I need to pay my rent. I need—" He stopped, jaw working. Then quieter. "I need Dad back. But that's not happening, is it?" Maggie had reached across the table, covered his hand with hers. "Stay with me for a while, just until you get back on your feet. There's plenty of room in your old bedroom." She could see it now the moment his eyes shifted. Relief and resentment tangled together. The boy who'd been so independent, who'd left for Harvard at 18 and never really come back, was retreating to his childhood home. "Just for a little while," he'd agreed. That was 3 years ago. 3 years of watching bourbon bottles multiply in the trash, of listening to him pace his room at night, having conversations with his dead father that grew increasingly angry, of finding him passed out on the couch, the TV playing infomercials at 4 a.m., his phone face down on the floor to hide whoever he'd been calling or not calling. His ex-wife, Jennifer, had tried to warn her once. 6 months after Daniel moved in, Jennifer had called from Atlanta. "Mrs. Thompson, I need you to know something about Daniel, about why we really got divorced." "Jennifer, I appreciate your concern, but Daniel's explained everything. The grief, the job stress. Did he tell you he shoved me into a wall when I was 8 months pregnant?" The words had hit like a slap. "That's not Daniel, would never. I have the hospital records. I have photos. I got Sarah and myself out before it got worse. I'm calling because I'm worried about you. He's getting worse, isn't he?" Maggie had made excuses, hung up, told herself Jennifer was bitter vindictive, that Daniel had been right about her all along. The first lie I told to protect him, Maggie thought now, standing in her living room at 6 a.m. on what would become the most important day of her life. But not the last. Never the last. The morning of October 14th, 12 hours before everything would change forever, Maggie had been cleaning Daniel's room. He'd left for wherever he went during the day, the bars downtown, she suspected, though he always came home reeking of different establishments, as if rotating locations made it less pathetic. She wasn't snooping. At least that's what she told herself as she picked up the piles of clothes-opened windows to air out the smell of stale alcohol and unwashed sheets. She was helping. Mother's help. The shoebox was under the bed, shoved behind old sneakers and a gym bag that hadn't been opened in years. She almost left it, but something intuition, or perhaps the universe finally giving her the push she needed, made her pull it out. Inside were papers, legal documents, awards, news clippings. Her hands shook as she spread them across the floor. 2018, South Carolina Bar Association, Top 40, Under 40 Attorneys, Whitmore & Associates Internal Memo. Daniel Thompson, billable hours, $427,000 highest associate rate, 3rd year running Charleston Business Journal. Rising star in civil litigation, 87% win rate in complex cases. Letter from Marcus Whitmore dated 8 months before Daniel's firing. "Daniel, your work on the Harrison versus Metropolitan Development case was nothing short of brilliant. The partners and I want to discuss your partnership track. Please schedule a meeting with me at your earliest convenience. The future of this firm needs minds like yours." Maggie sat back on her heels, the papers scattered around her like evidence of a crime. This wasn't the story Daniel had told her. This wasn't a tale of bad luck in a hostile workplace. This was a meteor deliberately crashing itself into the earth. Her son hadn't failed. He'd self-destructed. The distinction felt enormous. In the bottom of the box beneath the professional accolades, she found something else. A leather journal, small and worn. Her breath caught when she saw the handwriting on the first page. Property of Evelyn Hayes, 1983, her mother. Dead 15 years from breast cancer, taking so many secrets with her to the grave. Or so Maggie had thought. She shouldn't read it. It felt like a violation, like breaking a seal that was meant to stay closed. She read it anyway. March 15th, 1983, Robert came home drunk again. Said I'd overcocked the pot roast. I didn't argue. I learned months ago that arguing makes it worse. I stood very still while he threw the plate against the wall, while he grabbed my arm and squeezed until I could feel the bruises forming. Maggie was upstairs. I hope she didn't hear. I always hope she doesn't hear. But I see it in her eyes sometimes, the way she gets very quiet when Robert raises his voice. The way she flinches. 5 years old, and already she's learning to read the danger signs. What am I teaching my daughter? That love looks like fear. That a woman's place is to absorb a man's anger like a sponge, wringing herself out again and again until there's nothing left. The entries went on. Years of them. Maggie's hands trembled so violently she could barely turn the pages. Her mother, gentle, soft-spoken Evelyn, who'd made perfect Sunday dinners and volunteered at the church and smiled at everyone, had been trapped in a private hell. And Maggie, 5 years old, 6, 7, 8, had watched and absorbed and learned that this was normal. That this was what you did when you loved someone. You endured. You stayed quiet. You made excuses. No wonder I didn't believe Jennifer Maggie thought nausea rising. No wonder I've made excuse after excuse for Daniel. I learned from the master. She found it near the end of the journal, tucked between the pages, a Polaroid faded and bent at the corners. The photo showed a little girl with dark braids sitting on a kitchen floor, knees pulled to her chest. Behind her, blurry but unmistakable, two adult figures, one standing over the other, arm raised. The body language of violence captured in instant film. Maggie stared at the child in the photo, at herself 40 years younger, already learning to make herself small. The back of the photo bore a single line in her mother's handwriting, March 17, 1983. The day I knew I was teaching her the wrong lessons. I was too weak to leave. God forgive me. Maggie couldn't breathe. The room felt too small, the walls pressing in. She scrambled up papers, scattering, and made it to the bathroom just in time to vomit. When the heaving stopped, she sat on the cool tile floor and wept for her mother, for herself, for the cycle that kept spinning through generations like a curse. Her father Robert had died when Maggie was 23, a heart attack in his sleep. Everyone at the funeral spoke about what a good man he'd been, a devoted husband, a hard worker. Maggie had stood by her mother's side and watched Evelyn's face remain carefully neutral, revealing nothing. Did she feel relief? Maggie wondered now. When he died, did she finally breathe? She thought about her own marriage to Richard. He'd been nothing like Robert, gentle, patient, never raised his voice in anger. She'd chosen so carefully, breaking the pattern. But she'd given birth to Daniel, and somehow, despite everything, the violence had found its way into the next generation anyway. Different circumstances, different triggers, but the same fundamental truth: the strong over the weak, the bitter over the vulnerable. 3 days ago, Daniel had exploded because Maggie had suggested he might want to talk to a counselor. He'd swept his arm across the kitchen counter, sending her grandmother's ceramic mixing bowls 4 generations old crashing to the floor. "Stop trying to fix me," he'd shouted. "I'm not one of your fucking third graders." She'd cleaned up the broken pieces, cut her hand on a shard, and told him it was fine. It was just dishes, replaceable, but her hand still bore the bandage. And Daniel never apologized. 6 months before that, he'd shoved her when she'd asked where he'd been until 4 a.m. She'd stumbled backward into the wall, her hip connecting hard with the corner of the hallway table. The bruise had lasted 3 weeks, a grotesque purple-yellow map of impact. "You startled me," Daniel had said the next morning, hungover and sheepish. "I didn't mean to. I didn't even remember until you said something." She'd accepted that, because that's what you did. That's what her mother had taught her in silence and endurance. Maggie forced herself up from the bathroom floor. She walked to her bedroom, opened her nightstand drawer, and pulled out a small notebook, the one where she tracked her monthly expenses. She flipped to the back pages, the ones she'd started keeping 6 months ago when she'd first admitted to herself that she was afraid in her own home. June 8, 2024, Daniel pushed me when I asked about job applications. I fell into the coffee table, bruise on left shoulder. He says he doesn't remember. Promised to cut back on drinking. July 21st, 2024. Found him passed out on kitchen floor. When I tried to help him up, he swung at me, connected with my jaw. Thought you were someone else. Swore it would never happen again. August 15th, 2024. Argument about money. He slammed his fist on the table. Broke my finger when I tried to pull my hand away. Told the ER doctor I closed it in a car door. September 3rd, 2024. Threw glass at wall while drunk. Missed me by inches. Doesn't remember in morning. September 29th, 2024. Grabbed my arm so hard it left fingerprint bruises. I wore long sleeves for a week. 11 incidents. 11 times she'd told herself it wasn't that bad. Wasn't bad enough. He was grieving. He was sick. He was her son. 11 times she'd lied to herself. Her best friend Eleanor Hartfield had asked her point blank 2 months ago, "Maggie, is Daniel hurting you?" They'd been having coffee at Eleanor's kitchen table, the morning sun streaming through lace curtains, everything looking so normal and safe. "Don't be ridiculous," Maggie had said, pulling her cardigan tighter to cover the bruises on her forearms. "Daniel would never. He's just struggling. We all grieve differently." Eleanor, a retired federal judge with 30 years on the bench, had given her a long look, the kind of look that could extract truth from the most practiced liars. "Maggie Thompson, I have known you for 33 years. I was at your wedding. I held Daniel when he was 3 days old. And I am telling you, as someone who's presided over more domestic violence cases than I can count, that I'm worried about you. I appreciate it, but I'm fine, really." Eleanor had dropped it, but the look in her eyes said she knew. She'd always known. How many people knew, Maggie wondered now? How many watched me make excuses and said nothing? She thought about James Richardson, the young detective from Charleston PD who attended her church. Daniel's age, but they'd gone to different schools. Last month after service, James had pulled her aside. "Mrs. Thompson, you taught me in 3rd grade. Best year of my life." He'd smiled, then grown serious. "I also know your son lives with you, and I know things have been hard for him. If you ever need anything at all, you call me, day or night." He'd pressed his card into her hand. She still had it tucked in the same drawer as her secret notebook. Everyone had been offering her life rafts, and she'd been treading water, insisting she could swim. October 14th, 11:00 p.m. Maggie stood in her kitchen preparing Daniel's usual evening sandwich. Turkey and Swiss on wheat bread, mustard, not mayo lettuce, but no tomato. She'd been making it for him every night for 3 years, a small ritual that felt like mothering, even though it was probably enabling. Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Don't wait up. Out." She stared at the sandwich perfectly made and slowly wrapped it in plastic wrap before putting it in the refrigerator. He wouldn't eat it. He'd come home too drunk to care about food. Her next notification was an alert from their shared credit card she'd added him as an authorized user during those early days when she still believed his promises about getting back on his feet. Purchase at Lucky's Tavern, $247. Purchase at Anderson's Liquor Depot, $600 Hausders. $847 in a single evening. She did the math automatically. That was most of her weekly retirement check. Her teacher's pension carefully budgeted, slowly being drained by bourbon and bar tabs. Maggie sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd helped Daniel with homework when he was 8, where they'd celebrated his college acceptance, where Richard had carved the Thanksgiving turkey every year. The table where increasingly she ate dinner alone. She looked around her kitchen. Everything was exactly as she'd kept it for 40 years. The ceramic chicken cookie jar her mother-in-law had given her. The cross-stitch sampler above the sink. Bless this home. The calendar on the wall still showing October, marked with her standing weekly commitments. Bible study book club, volunteer reading at the elementary school. A normal life except for the notebook of violence hidden in her bedroom. Except for the bruises she'd gotten so good at covering with makeup and long sleeves. Except for the fear that had become her constant companion. Maggie got up and walked to the living room mantel. Next to the photo of Daniel's graduation stood the piece she'd been avoiding looking at all day, her grandmother's Chinese porcelain vase, a wedding gift from 1952. Delicate blue and white depicting cherry blossoms and cranes. Her grandmother had carried it from Savannah when she married, and it had sat on this mantel through 3 generations. "If you ever need to know you come from strong women," her grandmother had told her once, letting 5-year-old Maggie hold it carefully. "You look at this vase. It survived a war, overseas, a boat journey, and 60 years of family chaos. Some things are stronger than they look." Maggie touched it gently. Am I stronger than I look, she wondered. Or am I just brittle, waiting for the right impact to shatter? She went to bed at 11:30, but sleep wouldn't come. She lay in the dark, listening to the house settle, waiting for the sound she'd learned to dread Daniel's car in the driveway, the fumbling with keys, the stumble crash of intoxication. At 3:00 a.m. she was still awake. At 3:15 she heard it. 3:17 a.m., October 15th, 2024. The front door banged open so hard it hit the wall. Maggie was instantly alert, her body flooding with adrenaline, the familiar cocktail of fear and hypervigilance she'd learned to metabolize. She heard him in the foyer, cursing, the sound of something hitting the floor. Then, "Mom, Mom," the tone made her stomach drop. She recognized it now, could read the specific frequency of danger in his voice, the way meteorologists read storm warnings. Maggie got out of bed, pulled on her robe, and went to the stairs. Her hands were shaking. Daniel stood in the living room, swaying slightly, his expensive lawyer's clothes, the ones from his old life that he still wore like a costume, disheveled and reeking. The smell of bourbon and beer and cigarettes layered thick. Her grandmother's vase lay shattered on the floor. He'd thrown his keys at the hall table and missed hitting the mantel instead. "Daniel, what?" 3 years, he said, his words slurring. 3 fucking years I've lived in this house. 3 years of you looking at me like I'm a disappointment. Honey, don't lie. His voice escalated to a roar. You think I don't see it? Every time you look at me, I see Dad in your eyes. St. Richard the perfect man. And his failure of a son. Maggie came down the stairs slowly, carefully. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat, but he was blocking the only exit. She fell back on her teacher voice, calm, firm, non-threatening. Sweetheart, you're drunk. Let's just get you to bed. We can talk in the morning. I don't want to go to bed. He swept his arm across the coffee table, sending magazines and remote controls flying. I want to talk now. I want you to admit it. Admit what? That it's your fault that Dad died because he was so stressed about you, about taking care of you. If he hadn't been carrying that burden. The accusation was so absurd, so disconnected from reality, that Maggie actually felt her fear recede for a moment, replaced by something closer to pity. Daniel, your father died because he had an undiagnosed heart condition. That's not... She never saw him move. One moment he was across the room. The next his hand was in her hair, yanking her head back so hard her neck cracked. Stop telling me what to think. Each word was punctuated by another jerk on her hair. Tears sprang to her eyes, involuntary from pain and shock. Let go of me. Her voice came out small, which made her angry at herself. Daniel let go. He released her suddenly, and she stumbled backward, trying to catch her balance. You want to know what I think, Mom? I think you like this. I think you like playing the martyr. Poor Maggie sacrificing everything for her broken son. That's not true. Isn't it? He laughed an ugly sound. You could have kicked me out years ago, but then who would you have to fix? Who would need you? His hand shot out before she could register the movement. He shoved her hard, both palms against her shoulders. Maggie flew backward into the china cabinet. Her head connected with the glass door with a sickening crack. The world tilted. She tasted copper blood from somewhere. Her ears rang. She slid down to the floor, her legs unable to hold her weight. Through blurred vision, she saw Daniel standing over her, his face twisted into something she didn't recognize. You made me this way, he said, but his voice sounded far away now, underwater. Always coddling, always protecting, never letting me face consequences. Well, here's a consequence, Mom. Here's what your love created. He drew his hand back. She tried to raise her arm to protect her face, but her body wasn't responding correctly. Everything was moving in slow motion. The slap connected with her cheek, snapping her head to the side. She felt her lips split against her teeth. Blood filled her mouth. Then worse than the slap, his shoe connecting with her ribs. Once. Twice. She heard something crack inside her chest, felt a pain so sharp it drove all the air from her lungs. Daniel, stop! She tried to speak, but only a wheeze came out. He drew his foot back for another kick, and she closed her eyes, curling into herself, waiting for the impact. It didn't come. When she opened her eyes, he was walking away, heading for the stairs, mumbling something she couldn't quite hear. Something that sounded like deserved it, and finally shut up. Then she was alone on the kitchen floor, surrounded by broken glass and broken ceramic and her own blood. 3:30 a.m. Maggie didn't know how long she lay there. Time had become elastic, unreliable. The kitchen clock above the sink said 3:30, but she couldn't remember if she'd been on the floor for 5 minutes or 50. Her whole body screamed with pain. Her head throbbed where it had hit the cabinet. Her ribs sent sharp signals with every breath. Her face felt swollen, enormous, like it belonged to someone else. She tried to move, managed to roll onto her side, which sent fresh waves of agony through her torso. She lay still again, breathing shallowly, staring at the broken pieces of her grandmother's vase scattered across the floor. Each shard reflected the overhead light in fractured fragments. Beautiful, even in destruction. Some things are stronger than they look, her grandmother had said, and some things break. Maggie thought about her mother's journal hidden upstairs. I was too weak to leave. God forgive me. She thought about her secret notebook. 11 incidents leading to this 12th final one. She thought about 5-year-old Maggie sitting on a kitchen floor in a faded Polaroid learning all the wrong lessons about love. This ends with me, she thought. The words came from somewhere deep, some core part of herself she thought Daniel had beaten out of her. The cycle ends here, with me, tonight. Maggie tested her limbs. Her left hand worked. She could move her legs, though everything hurt. Her right arm screamed when she put weight on it, but it functioned. Slowly, agonizingly, she crawled across the kitchen floor to where her cell phone was charging on the counter. She had to stop twice, overwhelmed by waves of nausea and pain. But she reached it. First photos, evidence. She'd learned from her mother's mistake, silence erases truth. She turned the camera on herself. Her face in the phone screen made her gasp. Bruises already blooming purple-black around her eye. Her lips split and swollen. Blood on her teeth. She took 10 photos from different angles, then pulled up her nightgown to photograph the marks on her ribs, her arms, her shoulders. She sent them all to herself via email with a timestamp. Digital evidence harder to destroy than paper. Then she pulled up her contacts, scrolled to Eleanor's name. Her finger hovered over the call button. If I do this, there's no going back, she thought. If I call Eleanor, call the police, this becomes real. Public, permanent. Daniel will be arrested. He might go to jail. My only child, my son. Everyone will know. Everyone will see. They'll ask why I waited so long, why I stayed, why I didn't. She stopped herself, looked again at her reflection in the dark phone screen, at the ghost of the woman she'd been. Maggie pressed call. Eleanor answered on the second ring, her voice sharp with instant alertness, a skill developed from years on the bench where middle-of-the-night calls meant emergencies. Maggie, what's wrong? I need your help. Maggie's voice cracked. And I need you to not ask me to change my mind. Silence on the other end. Then carefully, where are you? Home. My kitchen floor. Daniel's upstairs asleep. Eleanor, The words caught in her throat. I can't do this anymore. I'm coming over right now. No. Maggie surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. Not yet. I have a plan. But I need you to trust me. Can you come tomorrow at 8 a.m. and bring your judge's robes if you still have them? Another pause. Maggie, what happened? Everything. Nothing new. The same thing that's been happening, except this time I'm not going to pretend it didn't. She took a shallow breath, her ribs protesting. I'm going to document everything. I'm going to build a case. And tomorrow morning I'm going to press charges. Oh, honey. Eleanor's voice broke. I should have pushed harder. You tried. I wasn't ready to hear it. Maggie pulled herself up to sit against the cabinet, biting back a groan. But I'm ready now. I'm done being my mother. I'm done teaching my son that love means being his punching bag. What do you need from me? Witness, moral support, legal expertise, 8 a.m., and Eleanor. Maggie looked at the broken vase, the blood on the floor, the evidence of her last night as a victim. Tell me I'm doing the right thing. You're doing the brave thing. The necessary thing. The thing that might save both your lives. Eleanor's voice steadied, shifting into judge mode. I'll be there at 8. And Maggie, I'm proud of you. After they hung up, Maggie made more calls. She'd waited until a more reasonable hour, though 5:30 a.m. hardly qualified. But cops were used to early mornings. Detective Richardson. James, this is Maggie Thompson, your third-grade teacher. A beat. Mrs. Thompson, is everything all right? No. The simple honesty felt like liberation. Everything is not all right, and I need to report an assault, but I need to do it in a very specific way, and I need you to trust me. She outlined her plan. With each detail, she could hear the tension in James's breathing. Mrs. Thompson, if you're in immediate danger... I'm not. He's passed out drunk. He won't wake up until after 10 if past patterns hold. The clinical detachment in her own voice surprised her. But I need this done right, James. I need it documented, witnessed, impossible to sweep under the rug. My son is a former lawyer. He knows how the system works. I need to make sure the system works this time. You want me to wait until 8 to arrest him. I want you to let him wake up sober. I want him to see what he did in the cold light of day. I want him to face it with full consciousness, not hide behind alcohol amnesia. She paused. And I want you to bring 2 other officers, for safety and as witnesses. That's actually smart. Legally airtight. She could hear the respect in his voice. I'll be there at 8 sharp. Mrs. Thompson, you're incredibly brave. I'm incredibly tired, James. There's a difference. Rachel was a civil rights attorney specializing in domestic violence cases. Maggie had helped her through a rough patch 5 years ago when Rachel's own sister had been killed by an abusive partner. They'd formed an unlikely friendship, the elementary school teacher and the fierce lawyer bonded by their shared understanding of how easily violence could hide behind closed doors. This is Rachel. It's Maggie Thompson. I'm calling in that favor you said I could. Name it. I need you to be present when I press charges against my son for domestic assault. I need your legal expertise, and I need—" She swallowed hard. "I need a witness who won't let me back down." Rachel's voice went very quiet. "Oh, Maggie, how long?" 3 years. Getting worse. Last night was the last time." "What do you need?" They talked for 20 minutes. Rachel explained South Carolina law, the specific charges that would apply, the process Maggie could expect. How domestic violence cases often collapsed because victims recanted. How the system would try to talk her into family counseling instead of prosecution. "You need to be prepared, Maggie. They're going to ask why you waited. They're going to question your credibility. Daniel will get a lawyer who will paint you as vindictive or confused or unstable. Then I need everything documented. Photos, medical records, witnesses." Maggie's teacher brain was clicking into organizational mode, a survival skill. "I need this to be undeniable. I'll bring everything you need. 8 a.m. Rachel hesitated. "Maggie, I'm so sorry you had to go through this, but I'm grateful you're choosing to stop it." Kate Morrison, journalist, 6:00 a.m. This call was the hardest. Making it public felt like stripping naked in the town square. But Maggie had learned something important in the dark hours of the morning silence was Daniel's greatest weapon. Darkness let violence thrive. Charleston Post Morrison speaking. "Kate, this is Maggie Thompson. We met at the school board meeting last year." "I remember. The teacher who stood up for the literacy program funding." Kate's voice sharpened with reporter's instinct. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Thompson?" "I have a story for you about domestic violence in prominent Charleston families, about how easily it hides, about how the system fails victims, especially when the abuser knows that system intimately." "I'm listening." "It's my story, Kate. My son, a former civil rights attorney who spent 3 years beating his mother. And I want it told. All of it. Because I need to make sure I can't take it back." She heard Kate's sharp intake of breath. "That's incredibly brave, and incredibly dangerous publicity-wise. Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." Maggie looked at her reflection in the darkened window. Dawn was just starting to break, painting the sky in shades of gray and gold. "Can you be at my house at 8 a.m.? I want you to document what happens when I finally stop being silent." "I'll be there." 6:15 a.m. The kitchen. Maggie stood at her stove, every movement sending fresh complaints from her bruised body. But she'd spent 40 years of her life finding solace in baking, and tonight, this morning, was no different. She pulled out her grandmother's recipe for buttermilk biscuits. 4 generations old, the index card stained with decades of flour and butter. The recipe she'd learned at her grandmother's hip, watching those strong hands knead and fold and shape. "A Southern woman's kitchen," her grandmother used to say, "is where she finds her strength. You put love in the dough, baby girl. You put your whole heart in there, and it comes back to you as nourishment." Maggie's hands moved through the familiar motions. Sift the flour. Cut in the cold butter until it resembles coarse meal. Add the buttermilk just until the dough comes together. Fold it over itself, gentle but firm. She made 48 biscuits. Enough for her guests, Eleanor James, and his officers, Rachel Kate. And enough for Daniel, who would eat thinking it was reconciliation. Let him think that. Let him believe he'd won again, that his mother's love was infinite and unconditional and too weak to enforce consequences. He'd learn differently soon enough. As she worked, tears fell into the dough from pain, from grief, from exhaustion, from determination. She didn't wipe them away. Let them be part of the recipe. Let her grandmother's love and her mother's pain and her own resolve all mix together into something nourishing. The biscuits went into the oven at 6:45. By 7:00 they were golden and perfect, filling the house with the smell of butter and home. 7:00 a.m. The dining room. Maggie transformed her dining room into a courtroom. She started with her great-grandmother's Battenberg lace tablecloth, the one used only for Christmas and Easter. It had survived over a century, and today it would bear witness to justice. Her wedding china came next, Wedgwood, a gift from Richard's parents. 12 place settings, though she'd only need 6. The formality felt important. This wasn't going to be a casual conversation. This was going to be a reckoning. She cooked a full Southern breakfast, scrambled eggs, bacon cheese, grits, fruit salad, and her grandmother's biscuits. Sweet tea and coffee. Orange juice. A feast. Or a last meal, depending on how you looked at it. The seating arrangement took careful thought. She labeled each place with a handwritten card. Head of the table, Judge Eleanor Hartfield. Right of Eleanor, Detective James Richardson. Left of Eleanor, Rachel Morrison. Attorney opposite. Eleanor Daniel Thompson, right of Daniel Kate Morrison Press. Left of Daniel Margaret Thompson. She created a centerpiece from the broken shards of her grandmother's vase carefully arranged in a clear glass bowl. A reminder, a symbol, broken but present, just like her. 7:30 a.m. Personal armor. Maggie went upstairs to her bedroom. Showered carefully, each movement deliberate despite the pain. She washed the blood from her hair, from her mouth, from her skin. But she didn't hide the evidence. She chose her navy dress, the one she'd worn to Richard's funeral 3 years ago. It felt appropriate. She was mourning something today, too. The death of her illusions. The end of enabling. The burial of the woman who'd chosen silence. Pearls at her throat. Richard's gift on their 30th anniversary. He'd clasped them for her, kissed her neck, told her she was beautiful. What would he think of her now? Would he be proud? Would he be horrified? Would he blame himself for Daniel's rage? She couldn't know. The dead keep their counsel. Makeup, but minimal. She covered nothing. Let the bruises show. Let the split lip speak. Let the evidence tell its truth on her face. Red lipstick on her injured mouth, a small act of defiance, of claiming herself back. She looked in the mirror. The woman staring back was both familiar and strange. Wounded but standing. Broken but unbeaten. This is the last time, she told her reflection, that I will be a victim in my own home. 7:55 a.m. The final wait, everything was ready. The table set, the food warm, the evidence documented, the witnesses notified, the case built. Maggie sat in her living room watching the sun fully rise over Charleston. The morning was unseasonably beautiful, clear sky, golden light birds singing their territorial songs. She thought about her mother dying without ever telling anyone the truth of her marriage, taking her bruises to the grave silent until the end. She thought about her son sleeping off his drunk upstairs, about to wake to a world forever changed. She thought about herself, 64 years old, a retired teacher, a widow, a mother, and wondered if she had the strength to see this through. The first car pulled up at 7:58. Eleanor. Maggie stood, smoothed her dress, touched her pearls. God, give me strength, she whispered. Then no, I'll give me strength. That's what I should have done all along. She opened the door. 7:58 a.m. Eleanor Hartfield stepped out of her silver Lexus carrying a garment bag and a leather briefcase that had seen 30 years of courtroom battles. She was 68, with silver hair cut in a precise bob and the kind of posture that commanded respect without saying a word. Retired federal judge, widowed 10 years, and Maggie's closest friend since their children had been in elementary school together. She took one look at Maggie standing in the doorway, and her professional composure cracked. Oh, dear God. Maggie. The bruises had ripened in the hours since the assault. Maggie's left eye was swollen nearly shut, surrounded by purple and black that spread across her cheekbone. Her lip was grotesquely swollen where it had split. A gash on her forehead, butterfly bandaged, but still angry and red. Eleanor climbed the porch steps, quickly reaching for Maggie's hands. We should get you to a hospital, right now. Forget everything else. I've been to the hospital. Maggie's voice was calm, though it cost her. Called Dr. Patricia Hayes at 6 this morning. She came here, examined me, documented everything. Cracked rib, possible concussion, multiple contusions. She wanted me admitted, but I told her I needed to do this first. Maggie. Eleanor, if I go to the hospital, I'll lose my nerve. I know myself. I'll start thinking about Daniel in jail. Daniel humiliated, Daniel's future ruined. I'll start making excuses. She squeezed her friend's hands. I need to do this now, while I'm still angry enough to be brave. Eleanor studied her face for a long moment, then nodded, shifting into the mode that had made her legendary in the Charleston legal community. All right, show me everything. We build the case first, then we execute it. They went inside. Maggie walked Eleanor through the scene, the broken vase, the blood she hadn't yet cleaned from the kitchen floor, the china cabinet with its cracked glass door. I took photos, time-stamped, sent them to myself and to my cloud storage. Maggie pulled up her phone showing the evidence. Each image made Eleanor's jaw tighten further. These are felony-level injuries, Maggie. This isn't simple assault. This is domestic violence of a high and aggravated nature. Class A felony in South Carolina. 2 to 20 years. I don't want revenge, Maggie said quietly. I want him to face what he did. I want him to get help, real help, not just promises. But I also want him to understand that there are consequences, that my life has value, that my safety matters. Eleanor opened her briefcase, pulling out legal documents. I took the liberty of preparing some paperwork, emergency restraining order, victim impact statement templates, your rights under South Carolina law. She paused. I also brought my robes. You asked me to. I need the formality, Maggie explained. Daniel has spent his whole life manipulating systems, finding loopholes. I need him to understand this isn't negotiable. This isn't Mom being dramatic. This is the law. You want to scare him. I want to save him. Fear might be the only language he understands right now. 7:50 a.m. 3 cars pull up. Through the front window, Maggie watched 3 vehicles arrive in quick succession. Detective James Richardson's unmarked sedan. Behind it, a patrol car with officers Lisa Martinez and Kevin Park. And finally, Rachel Morrison's practical Honda with Kate Morrison following in a car marked with Charleston Post press credentials. Eleanor went to answer the door while Maggie stayed in the kitchen, adding final touches to the breakfast spread. Her hands shook as she arranged the biscuits on her grandmother's serving platter. This was really happening. No turning back now. Mrs. Thompson? James Richardson entered the kitchen, and Maggie saw him try to mask his shock at her appearance. He was 45, fit and professional, with kind eyes that had seen too much violence in his years on the force. I need to document your injuries officially. Do I have your permission to photograph? Dr. Hayes already did a full medical photo series. I can send those to you. Maggie handed him her phone. But yes, take whatever additional photos you need. As James documented the scene, Officer Martinez, a woman in her early 30s with her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, approached Maggie gently. Ma'am, I want you to know that what you're doing takes incredible courage. I've responded to hundreds of domestic violence calls in my career. Most victims can't or won't press charges. The fact that you're doing this, that you're creating this whole support system. She stopped, cleared her throat. You're going to save lives with this. Other women will hear your story and find their own courage. Maggie nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Rachel Morrison entered next, carrying 2 briefcases. She was 38, whip-thin and intense, with auburn hair and the kind of focused energy that made juries pay attention. She'd built her career on domestic violence cases after her sister's death, and she brought a personal fury to her work that made her devastating in court. Maggie. Rachel set down her cases and pulled Maggie into a careful hug, mindful of injuries. I've been waiting for this call, hoping I wouldn't get it, but ready if I did. I should have called sooner. You called when you were ready. That's all that matters. Rachel opened her briefcase, pulling out thick folders. I brought everything. South Carolina DV statutes, case precedents, victims' rights documentation, information on mandatory arrest laws, which, by the way, is on our side. With visible injuries this severe, the officers have no discretion. They have to arrest. Even though he's my son, especially because he's your son, the law doesn't recognize love as an excuse for violence. Rachel's voice hardened. And Daniel, of all people, should know that. He built a career defending victims. He knows exactly what he's doing to you. The last to enter was Kate Morrison, no relation to Rachel, just an unfortunate coincidence that had bonded them professionally. Kate was 42, a veteran investigative journalist with sharp features and sharper instincts. She carried a professional camera and a digital recorder. Mrs. Thompson, I need to confirm your consent. You understand that anything I document today may become public record, that your story and your son's name will be in the newspaper. Maggie took a breath. This was the point of no return. Privacy was armor, but it was also a cage. Yes, I consent. I want this documented. I want other women to know they're not alone. And I want... Her voice caught. I want to make it impossible for me to back down. Once it's public, I can't pretend it didn't happen. Kate nodded slowly. That's the bravest reason I've ever heard. She paused. My sister Emily died 5 years ago. Her husband beat her to death. She'd called the police 17 times in 2 years. 17 times she pressed charges. 16 times she dropped them. The 17th time she didn't survive long enough to drop them. The room went silent. I'm alive, Kate continued, her voice tight with old grief. Because my sister isn't. If this story can save even one woman, if it can show that it's possible to choose yourself to break the cycle. She met Maggie's eyes. Then Emily's death means something. And your courage means everything. 7:55 a.m. Final preparations. Eleanor called them all into the dining room. 6 chairs around the formal table, each place setting, perfect, the broken vase centerpiece catching the morning light. All right, Eleanor said, her judge's voice filling the space. Let's be absolutely clear about what we're doing here and why we're doing it this way. She stood at the head of the table, and even in civilian clothes, though she'd change into her robes before Daniel came down, she commanded authority. This is not a kangaroo court. This is not vigilante justice. This is an intervention backed by law enforcement, witnessed by press, and executed with every legal protection in place. She looked at each person in turn. Daniel Thompson will be given every right guaranteed to him under law, including the right to remain silent. But he will not be given the option to pretend this didn't happen. He will not be allowed to gaslight his mother into believing she deserved this or imagined this. James stepped forward. From a law enforcement perspective, I have probable cause and an active warrant. Mrs. Thompson's injuries meet the threshold for mandatory arrest under South Carolina domestic violence statutes. The only unusual element here is the timing, allowing the suspect to wake naturally and eat breakfast before arrest. Which is entirely legal, Rachel added. There's no requirement for immediate arrest if the victim is safe and the suspect isn't a flight risk. And this approach actually strengthens our case. Daniel will be sober-fed and surrounded by witnesses when he's informed of the charges. He can't claim confusion, intoxication, or coercion. Eleanor turned to Maggie. This is your show, Maggie. Your rules. How do you want this to proceed? Maggie had been thinking about this all night between the pain and the planning. I want him to come downstairs thinking everything is normal. I want him to sit down to eat, to feel safe, the way I haven't felt safe in 3 years. She touched her swollen lip. Then I want him to see you all. I want him to understand what's happening. And then, her voice steadied. Then I want to speak. I want to tell him to his face why this is happening. Not with anger, with truth. And then Detective Richardson arrests him. Full procedure. Miranda rights, handcuffs, everything. She looked at James. I need him to understand that this is real, that he can't charm or manipulate or promise his way out of this. James nodded. We'll do it by the book. Professional, respectful, but absolutely firm. Kate raised her camera slightly. I'll document everything, but I won't be intrusive. Think of me as a silent observer. You won't even know I'm here. I want you here, Maggie said. I want the record. I want proof that I did this, that I followed through. Because in my weakest moments, and I'll have them, I want to remember that I had the courage to choose myself. Eleanor pulled out a document. I've prepared something to read. Not as a judge, I have no legal authority here anymore, but as a witness and as your friend. With your permission, I'd like to formally state for the record what we're observing, what we're doing, and why. Yes, Maggie said. I want that. The formality, the ceremony of it. Daniel needs to understand this isn't a family squabble. This is justice. Rachel checked her watch. It's 8:02. What time does he usually wake up? After 10, typically, but he'll smell the food, the biscuits. Maggie managed a small, pained smile. They're his favorite. He'll come down earlier than usual. So we have time. Eleanor pulled her robe from the garment bag, the black judicial robe she'd worn for 30 years on the federal bench. She slipped it on, and the transformation was immediate. She wasn't just Eleanor anymore. She was the embodiment of law and order. Officer Park, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. Mrs. Thompson, I want you to know my mom went through something similar with my dad. She never pressed charges, never told anyone. She just endured it for 35 years until he died. His young face was earnest. I wish she'd had your courage. I wish someone had helped her the way we're helping you. So thank you for letting us be part of this. The room was quiet for a moment, everyone absorbing the weight of what they were about to do. Then Maggie straightened her spine, touched her pearls, and said, Let's set the table. 2:15 a.m. In position, they arranged themselves carefully. Eleanor at the head of the table in her robes, looking every inch the judge she'd been. James and his 2 officers standing along the wall, professional and alert. Rachel next to Eleanor, her briefcases open, legal documents visible. Kate in the corner with her camera unobtrusive but present. and Maggie in the kitchen putting final touches on the breakfast spread. The food was perfect. The eggs fluffy and still warm, the bacon crisp, the grits creamy with butter and sharp cheddar, the biscuits golden and beautiful, carrying the smell of generations of love and tradition. She heard it then, the creak of floorboards upstairs. Daniel was awake. Her heart began to race. Every instinct screamed at her to run to hide, to call this off before it was too late. But she'd learned something important in the dark hours of the morning. Safety required more courage than silence ever had. She heard the bathroom door close, the shower running, Daniel going through his normal routine, completely unaware that his life was about to change forever. Maggie's hands shook as she poured orange juice into glasses. Eleanor appeared beside her, placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You can still change your mind," Eleanor said quietly. "Even now, even when he comes down. You can tell us to leave and we will. No judgment." "Will you?" Maggie met her friend's eyes. "No judgment." Eleanor hesitated, then shook her head. "No, I'd judge you, because I'd know you were choosing his comfort over your safety, and I love you too much to watch you do that anymore." "Good," Maggie said. "Then don't give me the option. Don't let me be weak." "You're not weak. You're the strongest woman I know. You're just tired of being strong alone." The shower stopped. Footsteps across the bedroom floor. "He's coming," Maggie whispered. Everyone took their positions. Eleanor seated at the head of the table. The officers alert but not threatening. Rachel calm and professional. Kate invisible with her camera. And Maggie in the kitchen doorway, waiting. 8:25 a.m. The morning after Daniel Thompson came down the stairs at 8:27 a.m., and Maggie saw him exactly as he was, a 42-year-old man wearing the ruins of his former self like a costume. He'd showered, shaved, put on clean clothes, khakis, and a button-down shirt, the uniform of his old lawyer life. But the clothes hung looser now, and his face had the puffy gray look of chronic alcohol abuse. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the banister. He didn't remember. She could see it in his eyes, in the careful way he moved, like someone trying to piece together a night from fragments and gaps. The smell of biscuits drew him toward the kitchen. He was halfway across the living room before he saw the elaborate dining table, the formal place settings. He stopped, confused. "Mom," his voice was rough, hungover. "What's all this?" Maggie stepped forward, and Daniel's eyes finally focused on her face. She watched the emotions flicker across his features, confusion, shock, dawning horror, and then most telling the quick calculation. The lawyer's brain engaging, looking for the angle, the explanation, the way out. "Mom, what happened to you?" Did you fall?" He moved toward her, hands outstretched in concern that might have been genuine or might have been performance. "We need to get you to a hospital." "Sit down, Daniel." Her voice was steady, surprisingly strong. "Your breakfast is getting cold." "But your face—" "I said sit down." She gestured to the chair at the opposite end of the table from Eleanor. The defendant's chair, though Daniel didn't know it yet. He hesitated, his eyes darting around the room, finally registering the oddity of the setup. The formal china, the elaborate food, the fact that there were 6 place settings. "Mom, what's going on?" "Sit, eat, then we'll talk." Something in her tone, or perhaps the undertone of steel he'd never heard before, made him obey. He walked to the table, pulled out the chair, sat down. Maggie served him personally, placed the plate before him with eggs and bacon and grits, set down a basket of fresh biscuits, still warm, poured his coffee exactly how he liked it, 2 sugars, splash of cream. A last meal, a final kindness, or perhaps just the ritual completion of years of caretaking before everything changed. Daniel picked up a biscuit, bit into it. For a moment his face relaxed, some tension easing. These were his favorite, his grandmother's recipe, the taste of childhood and safety and unconditional love. "Mom, these are perfect. You didn't have to go to all this trouble." He reached for the butter, and that's when he noticed the centerpiece. The broken vase, the shattered pieces arranged in the glass bowl, catching light impossible to ignore. His hand froze. His face went pale. "Mom," he said carefully, "where did all this broken glass come from?" 30 a.m. The reveal, Maggie didn't answer. Instead, she walked to the living room doorway and said simply, "Come in." The dining room doors opened. Eleanor entered first, her judicial robes sweeping her face stern and formal. She took her seat at the head of the table with the authority of 30 years on the bench. Detective James Richardson came next, his badge clipped to his belt, followed by Officers Martinez and Park in full uniform. Rachel Morrison carrying her briefcases of legal documentation, and Kate Morrison with her camera already documenting. Daniel's fork clattered to his plate. He half stood, then sat back down, his face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. "What the hell is this?" He looked at his mother. "Mom, what's going on? Who are all these people?" Eleanor spoke, her voice carrying the weight of decades of pronouncing judgment. "Mr. Daniel Thompson, my name is Eleanor Hartfield, retired federal judge, District of South Carolina. I'm here today as a witness and friend to your mother, Margaret Thompson." Daniel's eyes widened. "Judge Hartfield, I know who you are. We met at the Bar Association dinner in 2017. What are you doing in my mother's house in a judge's robe?" "Providing context," Eleanor said calmly. "Detective James Richardson, Charleston Police Department, is here in his official capacity, as are Officers Martinez and Park. Rachel Morrison is representing your mother's legal interests, and Kate Morrison is documenting these proceedings for public record." "Public record," Daniel's voice rose. "What proceedings, Mom? What is this?" James stepped forward, his voice professional and firm. "Mr. Thompson, before we continue, I need to inform you that you are currently under investigation for felony domestic violence. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you." Wait. Daniel was on his feet now, backing away from the table. "Domestic violence? That's insane. Mom, tell them. Tell them this is crazy." Maggie stood at the far end of the table, her hands gripping the back of her chair. "Sit down, Daniel." "I'm not sitting down until someone tells me what the hell is happening." "You want to know what's happening?" Maggie's voice didn't rise, but something in it cut through Daniel's panic. "What's happening is that last night at approximately 3:17 a.m. you came home intoxicated. You threw your keys at the hall table, destroying my grandmother's antique vase. When I asked you to go to bed, you grabbed me by my hair, shoved me into the china cabinet, struck me in the face, and kicked me in the ribs while I was on the floor." The words hung in the air, each one a piece of irrefutable truth. Daniel's face went from red to white. I was drunk. I don't remember that. It must have been an accident." "You don't remember?" Maggie pulled out her phone, brought up the photos she'd taken at 3:30 a.m., walked around the table and set the phone in front of him. "Here's your accident, Daniel. Here's what you don't remember." Daniel looked at the screen. The first photo showed Maggie's face at 3:31 a.m., bruised, bloody, swollen. The second showed her ribs already purpling. The third showed the blood on the kitchen floor. "Oh my God!" His voice came out strangled. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean. I don't even remember. If I did that, I'll get help. I'll go to rehab today. Right now. You've promised that 11 times, Maggie said quietly. "I have it written down. 11 times you've sworn you'd get help, you'd stop drinking, you'd change. 11 times I believed you." She pulled out her notebook, opened it to the page where she'd documented every incident, set it on the table next to the photos. June 8th, July 21st, August 15th, September 3rd, September 29th. She recited the dates like a litany. "Each time you hurt me. Each time you apologized. Each time I told myself it would be the last time." Daniel was shaking his head, backing further from the table. No, this isn't, Mom. You're making too big a deal of this. I'm sick. I need help. Not police and lawyers and—" "You need both," Eleanor interjected. "You need help, but you also need consequences. Your mother's love has been unconditional for 3 years. Love without accountability is just enabling, Mr. Thompson, and your mother is done enabling." In 35 a.m., Eleanor stood and the room fell silent. Even Daniel stopped his panicked protests held by the authority in her bearing. "Daniel Thompson, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say." Eleanor's courtroom voice filled every corner of the room. "I've known you since you were 10 years old. I watched you grow into a brilliant young man. I attended your law school graduation. I read about your pro bono work with pride." She paused, letting that sink in. "I also presided over 847 domestic violence cases during my time on the bench. I've heard every excuse, every justification, every promise. I've seen the patterns of abuse, the cycle of violence, the way it escalates. And I've seen what happens when that cycle isn't interrupted." Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but Eleanor held up one hand. You will listen. Then you may speak." She pulled out a document, though Maggie suspected she could recite it from memory. "At approximately 3:17 a.m. on October 15th, 2024, you assaulted your mother in her own home, a home where she had provided you shelter, food, and support for 3 years following your termination from Whitmore & Associates." Daniel flinched at that detail, the reminder of his fall from grace. The assault included, but was not limited to, grabbing your mother by her hair and yanking her head back with sufficient force to cause neck strain, shoving her into a glass-fronted cabinet with enough violence to crack both the glass and her 7th rib, striking her in the face with an open hand, causing lip laceration and dental injury, and kicking her in the torso while she was incapacitated on the floor. With each item, Daniel seemed to shrink smaller. Your mother suffered a grade 2 concussion, a fractured rib, multiple contusions, lacerations requiring stitches, and significant bruising. Dr. Patricia Hayes examined her at 6 a.m. this morning and documented injuries consistent with severe domestic violence. Eleanor set down the paper and looked directly at Daniel. "Now here's what makes this particularly egregious, Mr. Thompson. You were until 3 years ago a civil rights attorney. You specialized in defending victims of abuse and discrimination. You know the law. You know the psychological patterns. You know the statistics about how domestic violence escalates. You know that the greatest predictor of homicide in DV cases is previous non-fatal strangulation or head trauma." She let that hang in the air, the unspoken implication that Daniel had been on a path to killing his mother. "So this isn't just assault, Daniel. This is assault committed by someone who absolutely knew better, who understood exactly what he was doing and what it could lead to." Rachel stood next, her briefcase open, pulling out documents. "Mr. Thompson, I'm here to inform you of the legal reality you're facing. Under South Carolina law, domestic violence of a high and aggravated nature is a Class A felony carrying a sentence of 2 to 20 years in prison." She laid out several documents on the table, each one turned so Daniel could read them. "South Carolina has mandatory arrest laws for domestic violence cases with visible injury, which means Detective Richardson has no discretion here. The arrest must happen." She tapped one document. "Your mother has also filed for an emergency restraining order, which will be heard by a judge within 24 hours. That order will require you to stay at least 500 feet away from this residence and from your mother." Daniel's breathing was becoming rapid, panicked. "Rachel, come on. We've met at Bar Association events. You know me. You know I'm not they." "I know you're an abuser," Rachel said flatly. "I don't care if we've had cocktail party conversations, Mr. Thompson. I don't care about your resume or your pedigree or how charming you can be when you're sober. I care about the fact that you beat your 64-year-old mother so badly she has a concussion and a fractured rib." She leaned forward, her voice hardening. "And here's what else I know. I know your ex-wife Jennifer filed 3 domestic violence reports against you during your marriage. I know your daughter Sarah, who is now 9 years old, witnessed you shove Jennifer while she was pregnant. I know Jennifer got an emergency restraining order and full custody specifically because of your violence." Daniel's face went gray. "How do you that sealed? Those records are—" "I'm very good at my job, Mr. Thompson, and I'm very motivated." Rachel pulled out another document. "Jennifer has agreed to testify in court about the pattern of violence in your marriage. She's also seeking to have your supervised visitation rights with Sarah terminated based on this new assault." "No," Daniel's voice broke. "No, you can't. Sarah is my daughter. I have rights." "You forfeited those rights when you chose violence," Rachel said, "repeatedly, over years, escalating each time." To 45 a.m., Maggie had been quiet during Eleanor's and Rachel's statements, letting the law speak first. But now it was time for her voice. She stood at her end of the table, facing her son across the formal china and the broken vase and the elaborate breakfast that neither of them would finish. "Daniel, look at me." He'd been staring at the table, tears streaming down his face. Slowly he raised his eyes to meet hers. "I have been silent for 3 years," Maggie said. Her voice was steady, but there was something beneath it, a bedrock of strength that surprised even her. "My silence enabled you. My love became permission for you to hurt me." "Mom, please." "I'm not finished." She'd spent 40 years in classrooms managing children. She knew how to command attention. "You're going to listen to me now because this is the last time I'm going to explain myself to you." Daniel closed his mouth. 3 years ago, you moved into my home. You were grieving your father. You were struggling with alcoholism. You were lost. And I thought, her voice caught slightly, I thought I could love you back to wholeness. I thought if I just gave you enough time, enough support, enough forgiveness, you would heal. She touched her swollen lip, wincing. But I've learned something important, Daniel. Forgiveness without consequences isn't love. It's cowardice dressed up as compassion. Every time I forgave you for hurting me, I was teaching you that my pain doesn't matter, that I don't matter. That's not true. You matter more than anyone. Then why do you keep hurting me? The question was quiet but devastating. If I matter so much, why have you beaten me 11 times in 3 years? Why have I had to lie to my doctor, to my friends, to myself about where these bruises come from? Daniel had no answer. I found my mother's journal, Maggie continued. Did you know your grandmother was abused? For 20 years my father beat her, and I watched. I was 5 years old sitting on kitchen floors watching my father hurt my mother. And she never left. She never pressed charges. She just endured. She pulled out the Polaroid, the faded photo of herself as a child, set it on the table. That's me, 5 years old, already learning that love looks like fear, that a woman's job is to absorb a man's anger, that silence is safety. She looked at Daniel. My mother died without ever telling anyone her truth. She took her bruises to the grave. Maggie's voice strengthened. I refuse to do the same. I refuse to teach my son or my granddaughter that love means enduring violence. I refuse to die in silence like my mother did. Daniel's head snapped up. Granddaughter, what are you, Sarah? Maggie said simply. Your daughter, who I only learned about when Jennifer reached out to me after seeing the article that will be published tomorrow morning. She saw the realization hit him, the article, the publicity, the fact that this wasn't staying private and hidden. Tomorrow morning, Maggie continued, Kate's article will run in the Charleston Post. It will detail what happened to me. It will include my name and yours. It will talk about domestic violence in prominent Charleston families, about how easily it hides, about how silence enables it. You're going to humiliate me, Daniel said, his voice hollow. Publicly destroy me. No, Maggie said. I'm going to tell the truth. If the truth humiliates you, that's on you, not me. She walked around the table slowly, each step deliberate, despite her pain, until she stood directly in front of her son. Daniel, I love you. I will always love you. You are my child. But I love myself more than I fear losing you. The words landed like a gavel. You are going to leave this house today. You are going to be arrested. You are going to face the legal consequences of what you did. And I am going to press charges. I will not recant. I will not be talked out of it. I will not let you manipulate me with tears or promises or threats. Daniel was weeping openly now. Mom, please. I'm begging you. I'll do anything. I'll go to rehab. I'll never drink again. You've begged before, Maggie said, not unkindly. You've promised before, and I've believed you before. But believing your promises has nearly cost me my life. She reached out, touched his face gently, the last tender gesture before everything changed. The best thing I can do for you right now is stop enabling you. The most loving thing I can do is let you face consequences. Maybe, her voice broke slightly, maybe this will save your life. Maybe hitting rock bottom will finally make you choose recovery. But I'll lose everything, Daniel whispered. You've already lost everything, Maggie said softly. You lost it the first time you raised your hand to someone you love. You just didn't realize it yet. She stepped back, looked at Detective Richardson, and said the words that would change everything. Detective Richardson, I want to press charges. Full extent of the law. I will cooperate completely with the prosecution, and I will testify in court. 5:55 a.m. Daniel surged up from his chair so suddenly it fell backward, clattering against the hardwood floor. This is insane! His voice cracked, desperate. You're going to send your own son to prison over what an accident, a moment of 11 moments, Eleanor interjected coldly. 11 documented assaults over 3 years. This wasn't a moment, Mr. Thompson. This was a pattern. Daniel ignored her, focused entirely on his mother. Mom, think about what you're doing. Think about our family. Think about Dad. What would Dad say if he knew you were doing this? It was the wrong thing to say, and Maggie's face hardened. Your father would be ashamed of you, she said quietly. Ashamed of the man you've become. You use his death as an excuse, but Richard Thompson never raised a hand to anyone in his life. He would be devastated to know you used his memory to justify hurting me. I'm sick, Mom. I'm an alcoholic. I need treatment, not jail. You'll get treatment, Rachel said, pulling out another document. South Carolina requires court-ordered substance abuse evaluation and treatment as part of any DV sentencing. You'll get help, but you'll get it as a consequence, not instead of one. Daniel's panic was escalating. He looked around the room, seeking an ally, finding none. Detective Richardson James were both professionals. You understand addiction. You've seen how it destroys people. You can't possibly think arresting me is the right call here. James's face remained impassive. Mr. Thompson, I've arrested dozens of men who said exactly what you're saying right now. Addiction doesn't excuse assault, and your mother's safety is my priority, not your comfort. Daniel turned to Officer Martinez. You said you understand domestic violence. Then you understand families are complicated. That sometimes things happen that aren't. Sir, stop talking, Martinez said firmly. Anything you say right now can be used against you in court. I strongly advise you to remain silent. I don't want to remain silent. I want someone to listen to reason. Daniel's voice was rising toward hysteria. This is my mother. I would never deliberately hurt my mother. And yet, Eleanor said, gesturing at Maggie's face, you did. Repeatedly. Severely. Your intentions are irrelevant. Your actions speak for themselves. 9:05 a.m. Something changed in Daniel's face. The panic shifted, hardening into something uglier. Fine, he said, his voice going cold. You want to do this? Let's do this. But you better be prepared for what comes next, Mom. Maggie felt her stomach clench, but she kept her face neutral. I'm a lawyer. Daniel continued, that old arrogance creeping back in. I know how these cases work. I know how defense attorneys operate. And I promise you, by the time my attorney is done, you're going to look like a vindictive old woman who's trying to punish her son for what? Having a drinking problem, for being depressed. For beating me, Maggie said simply. Alleged beating, Daniel shot back. Who's to say you didn't fall? Who's to say those bruises didn't come from something else? You're 64 years old. You're on blood thinners for your heart condition. You bruise easily. Rachel stood up sharply. Mr. Thompson, I strongly advise you to stop talking immediately. But Daniel was on a roll now, the lawyer in him finding familiar ground argued deflect win. And even if I did accidentally push you while intoxicated, what jury is going to send a grieving son to prison for an accident, especially when his mother provided him alcohol? I did no such thing. You bought the bourbon. It's in your kitchen. You enabled my drinking. Daniel's voice was rising again. Any decent attorney will argue you're partially responsible. That's enough. Eleanor's voice cracked like a whip. Mr. Thompson, you are now actively demonstrating the manipulation and victim blaming that characterizes abusive relationships. Every word out of your mouth right now is undermining any sympathy anyone in this room might have had for you. But Daniel was too far gone, too panicked, too desperate. You're going to regret this, he said to Maggie, his voice low and threatening. When I'm in jail, when you're alone in this house, when everyone knows what you did, you're going to regret destroying your own son. Officer Park stepped forward, hand moving toward his cuffs. Sir, that sounded like a threat. It's not a threat, it's a promise, Daniel snarled. She wants consequences, fine. Here are consequences. I'll never forgive her. Ever. She can press charges, she can testify, she can do whatever she wants. But when this is over, if I go to jail and come back, I will never forget that she chose strangers over her own blood. The room went very quiet. Maggie looked at her son, really looked at him, at the twisted rage in his face, at the entitlement and self-pity and complete inability to take responsibility, and she felt something break loose inside her, not her resolve that remained steel solid, but her last remaining illusion that Daniel was still in there somewhere, buried under the addiction. The boy who'd defended old ladies and promised to protect the vulnerable, that boy was gone. Or maybe he'd never really existed except in her imagination. Detective Richardson, Maggie said, her voice clear and calm. Please proceed with the arrest. 9:10 a.m. James Richardson stepped forward, pulling handcuffs from his belt. Daniel Thompson, you are under arrest for domestic violence of a high and aggravated nature. You can't, this is Mom. Daniel backed away, holding his hands up. Please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean those things. I'm just scared. Please don't do this. The shift from threats to pleading would have been whiplash-inducing if Maggie hadn't seen it 100 times before. This was Daniel's pattern rage, then manipulation, then tears, then promises. The cycle that had kept her trapped for 3 years. Not anymore. "You have the right to remain silent," James continued, approaching steadily. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you." "I am an attorney," Daniel shouted. "I know my rights." "Then you know to remain silent, sir. Please turn around and put your hands behind your back." For a moment, Maggie thought Daniel might run, might fight. His body tensed, his eyes darting toward the back door. Officers Martinez and Park moved to flank the exits. Daniel's shoulders slumped. He turned around slowly, hands behind his back. The click of handcuffs closing around his wrists was the loudest sound Maggie had ever heard. "This is real," Daniel said, sounding dazed. "You're really doing this?" "Yes," Maggie said. "I am." As James began to lead Daniel toward the door, Daniel twisted to look back at his mother one last time. "I'll never forgive you for this," he said. Maggie met his eyes steadily. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Daniel. I'm asking for your rehabilitation. For yourself. For Sarah. For every person you might hurt if I stayed silent. You've destroyed me." "No," Maggie said softly. "I've tried to save you. There's a difference." The front door opened. Morning sunlight streamed in bright and clean and new. Detective Richardson guided Daniel through it, reading him the rest of his rights. Officers Martinez and Park followed, professional and alert. The door closed behind them. And Maggie was alone with Eleanor, Rachel, and Kate in the sudden profound silence. 9:15 a.m., October 15th, 2024. For several long moments after the door closed, nobody moved. The dining room felt suspended in time, the untouched breakfast growing cold, the formal place setting still perfect, the broken vase catching morning light. Then Maggie's legs gave out. Eleanor caught her before she hit the floor, guiding her gently into the nearest chair. "I've got you. I've got you." The adrenaline that had been holding Maggie upright for 6 hours drained away all at once, leaving her shaking so violently her teeth chattered. The pain she'd been suppressing in her ribs, her head, her face came roaring back with a vengeance. "Rachel, get her some water," Eleanor commanded. "Kate, put down that camera and find her pain medication. Medicine cabinet in the upstairs bathroom." Kate was already moving her journalistic distance, abandoned. Rachel pressed a glass of water into Maggie's hands, but they were shaking too badly to hold it. Rachel steadied the glass herself, helping Maggie drink. "Breathe," Eleanor said softly, rubbing Maggie's back in small circles. "Just breathe. You did it. It's done." "I sent my son to jail," Maggie whispered. "Oh God. Eleanor, what have I done?" "You saved both your lives," Eleanor said firmly. "You stopped a cycle. You chose yourself. You did the right thing. Then why does it feel so wrong?" Eleanor cupped Maggie's face, gently mindful of the bruises. "Because love doesn't stop just because someone hurts you. Because you're a mother, and mothers are wired to protect their children even when those children become dangerous. Because you're a good person, Maggie and good people feel pain when they have to hurt someone they love, even when it's necessary." Kate returned with medication. Prescription pain reliever from Dr. Hayes. She left instructions: 2 pills every 6 hours. Maggie swallowed the pills with Rachel's help. Already she could feel exhaustion pulling at her, the combination of pain medication and emotional collapse. "You should rest," Rachel said. "We can handle everything else today. The restraining order hearing isn't until tomorrow. You don't have to think about any of this right now." But Maggie shook her head. "No, I need to know what happens next. I need to understand the process. If I stop moving, if I let myself think too much." Her voice broke. "I might change my mind. I might call Detective Richardson and tell him I made a mistake." "You didn't make a mistake," Kate said quietly. She'd set down her camera and was looking at Maggie with an expression of profound respect mixed with old grief. "Mrs. Thompson, my sister Emily, called me 17 times over 2 years. 17 times she told me she was leaving her husband. 16 times she went back. And every time she went back, she said the same thing. He's my husband. I love him. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe it wasn't that bad." Kate's voice roughened. "The 17th time she didn't call me. Her neighbor did. Emily was dead. beaten to death in her own bedroom while her 4-year-old daughter hid in a closet. The room went silent. So no, Kate continued, you didn't make a mistake. You made the hardest, bravest choice possible, and you saved yourself. Eleanor drove Maggie to the hospital despite her protests. Dr. Hayes did a preliminary exam at your house, but you need full imaging. That rib could be worse than she thought, and your head concussions are nothing to play around with. The emergency room was relatively quiet for a Saturday morning. The intake nurse took one look at Maggie's face and immediately upgraded her to priority. A young ER doctor named Patel examined her with gentle efficiency. Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to be straight with you. These injuries are severe. You need a CT scan to rule out intracranial bleeding, X-rays for that rib, and to check for any other fractures. And I'm going to recommend you stay for observation. I can't, Maggie said automatically. You need to let professionals make sure you're not going to die from a brain bleed, Dr. Patel said bluntly. Mrs. Thompson, head trauma in patients over 60 is extremely serious. I've seen patients walk around fine after a concussion, then collapse hours later. You're staying, at least overnight. Eleanor squeezed Maggie's hand. I'll stay with you, and Rachel can handle the legal paperwork. You're not doing anyone any good if you die from stubbornness. The CT scan showed no brain bleed, thank God, but confirmed the concussion. X-rays revealed not just 1 but 2 cracked ribs, additional bruising on her spine where she'd hit the cabinet. You're lucky, Dr. Patel said, though her tone suggested she didn't think Maggie was lucky at all. Another few inches and that kick could have ruptured your spleen. The head injury could have been fatal. A different kind of doctor came next, a social worker named Keisha Williams specializing in domestic violence. Mrs. Thompson, I understand you've already pressed charges. That's excellent, but I want to make sure you have support resources. She handed over a thick folder of information. Counseling services, support groups, legal aid if you need it. Domestic violence doesn't end with an arrest. The psychological trauma can last years. I know, Maggie said quietly. My mother was abused for 20 years. She never told anyone, never got help. She just endured until my father died. Keisha's expression softened with understanding. Then you know how important it is to break that silence, to get help, to not try to handle this alone. Kate Morrison worked through the afternoon writing and rewriting. This wasn't just a news story. This was a testament, a document of courage that might save lives. At 6 p.m., the article went live on the Charleston Post website. By 6:30, it had been shared 300 times. By 7 p.m., it was trending on local social media. When Love Hurts, a Charleston Teacher's Stand Against Domestic Violence, by Kate Morrison, Margaret Thompson, 64. A beloved retired elementary school teacher from Charleston did something remarkable on the morning of October 15th. She chose herself. After enduring 3 years of escalating domestic violence from her son Daniel Thompson, 42, a former civil rights attorney who once specialized in defending abuse victims, Mrs. Thompson orchestrated what she calls a breakfast verdict. She gathered witnesses, including a retired federal judge, police detectives, a lawyer, and this reporter. She documented her injuries. She pressed charges. And she refused to stay silent. My mother was abused for 20 years. Mrs. Thompson told me from her hospital bed where she's recovering from a concussion, fractured ribs, and multiple contusions. She never told anyone. She died with that secret. I refuse to do the same. I refuse to teach my son or my granddaughter that love means enduring violence. The article went on to detail the statistics: 1 in 4 women experiencing severe physical violence by an intimate partner. The fact that family violence is the least reported and least prosecuted category of assault. The cycle of abuse that repeats through generations. It quoted Eleanor, Margaret Thompson demonstrated extraordinary courage. She built a case, gathered witnesses, and ensured she couldn't back down. She understood that loving herself had to take priority over protecting her abuser. It included a statement from Rachel. Most domestic violence cases fail because victims recant under pressure from family fear of economic hardship or misplaced guilt. Mrs. Thompson eliminated those escape routes. She made her stand public, documented, and irrevocable. And it ended with Maggie's own words. To any woman reading this who's suffering in silence, your life has value. Your safety matters. You deserve better than fear in your own home. And it's never too late to choose yourself. By 10 p.m., the article had been shared over 5,000 times. Comments poured in, hundreds of women sharing their own stories, thanking Maggie for her courage. But not everyone was supportive. Some comments were cruel. She destroyed her own son for attention. What kind of mother sends her child to jail? This is what happens when women get too much power. Daniel's former colleagues from Whitmore and Associates released a carefully worded statement. While we cannot comment on pending legal matters, we can confirm that Daniel Thompson resigned from our firm in 2021 due to personal issues. We support all victims of domestic violence. The subtext was clear. They were distancing themselves. Daniel was on his own. Judge Patricia Kowalski was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd been hearing domestic violence cases for 20 years. She looked at the photographic evidence, read Dr. Hayes' medical report, and took exactly 4 minutes to make her decision. Emergency restraining order granted. 500 feet minimum distance. No contact with the victim except through approved legal channels. Mr. Thompson, do you understand these conditions? Daniel, appearing via video link from the County Detention Center, looked gaunt and hollow. Yes, Your Honor. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and additional charges. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Your preliminary hearing is scheduled for October 30th. Bail is set at $50,000. Eleanor leaned over to whisper to Maggie. He won't make bail. His assets are frozen from unpaid debts and his former firm won't help him. He'll stay in jail until trial. Maggie nodded, feeling both relief and guilt at the thought of her son behind bars. October 20th, 2024. 5 days post-arrest. The envelope arrived with an Atlanta postmark. Maggie recognized Jennifer's handwriting immediately. Daniel's ex-wife, the woman she'd dismissed as bitter and vindictive 3 years ago. Inside was a letter and a child's drawing. Dear Margaret, I saw Kate Morrison's article. I've read it 17 times. Each time I've cried for you, for me, for all of us who stayed silent too long. I need to say something I should have said 3 years ago. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't try harder to warn you. I'm sorry I let my anger at you for not believing me turn into silence. I'm sorry I didn't keep calling, keep trying, keep fighting to protect you. When I left Daniel in 2021, I was 8 months pregnant with Sarah. He'd shoved me during an argument about baby names. Not hard enough to make me fall, but hard enough to scare me. That wasn't the first time. There'd been 3 other incidents, but it was the last straw. I couldn't bring a child into that environment. I tried to tell you. I called you. Remember I said, Mrs. Thompson, Daniel hurt me. And you said he's grieving. He's not himself. You defended him. I was so angry at you for that. I thought you were complicit. I thought you were choosing his narrative over my truth. It wasn't until I read your article that I understood you weren't complicit. You were his next victim. And I'm so sorry I didn't see that. The letter continued, but Maggie had to stop reading because tears were blurring the words. Jennifer had tried to warn her, and she'd dismissed it. How much pain could have been prevented if she'd listened? She wiped her eyes and continued. Margaret, I'm writing because I need your help. Daniel currently has supervised visitation rights with Sarah, 2 hours every other Sunday at a court-approved facility. He's never hurt Sarah physically, but she's terrified of him. She's seen him rage at me. She's heard him break things. She knows he's dangerous, even if he's never directed that danger at her. I'm filing to terminate his visitation rights entirely. With your testimony about the recent assault along with my documentation of his violence during our marriage, I believe I can get full custody with no visitation. I know this is asking a lot. You've already been so brave. But I'm begging you, will you testify? Will you help me protect Sarah from him? Also, Sarah wanted me to send you something. She barely remembers you. She was only 3 when we moved to Atlanta, but when I told her what you did, how brave you were, she drew you a picture. She calls you Grandma Maggie. I hope that's okay. With gratitude and respect. Jennifer. Maggie set down the letter with shaking hands and picked up the drawing. It was done in crayon the way only a 9-year-old could draw. 2 stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. One figure was tall with gray hair labeled Grandma Maggie in careful child printing. The other was small with brown braids labeled Me, Sarah. Above them in wobbly letters, Grandma is brave. I want to be brave too. Maggie pressed the drawing to her chest and wept. She had a granddaughter, a beautiful, innocent child who needed protection from the same man Maggie had finally found the courage to stand against. She called Jennifer immediately. I'll testify, Maggie said when Jennifer answered. I'll do whatever you need. Send me the court date. I'll be there. Thank you. Jennifer's voice broke with relief. Thank you so much. Jennifer, I'm the one who should apologize. You tried to warn me. You reached out and I dismissed you. I called you vindictive. Maggie's voice caught. I'm so sorry. You were a victim too, Jennifer said gently. He manipulated you the same way he manipulated me. We can't change the past, but we can protect Sarah's future. Together. Together, Maggie agreed. After they hung up, Maggie sat with Sarah's drawing for a long time, studying every crayon line. This child her grandchild was watching, learning, absorbing lessons about what love looks like, what strength looks like, what women do when they're hurt. I'm breaking the cycle, Maggie thought. For Sarah, for all the daughters and granddaughters to come. This ends with me. Late October 2024. The aftermath of Kate's article created waves Maggie hadn't anticipated. Her former principal from Charleston Day School called Maggie, "We're organizing a fundraiser for your medical bills. Also, would you be willing to speak to our staff about recognizing signs of domestic violence? I think we could all learn from your experience." Her church, St. Michael's Episcopal, dedicated a Sunday sermon to domestic violence awareness. Reverend Patricia Simmons spoke about the courage it takes to break silence, to choose safety, to love oneself enough to demand better. 43 women contacted Kate Morrison with their own stories. Some wanted to go public. Others just needed to tell anyone that they understood. A local domestic violence shelter asked Maggie to join their board of directors. "Your story is powerful," the director said, "and you understand both the psychology of staying and the courage it takes to leave." But there was also backlash. Someone spray-painted "Family Destroyer" on her driveway. Eleanor helped her clean it off at 3 a.m., both of them working in the dark so the neighbors wouldn't see. Anonymous letters arrived, some supportive, some hateful. One read, "You're going to hell for what you did to your son. A mother's love is supposed to be unconditional. You failed." Maggie had to resist the urge to respond, to explain, to justify. Eleanor threw that letter in the trash. "Don't engage," Eleanor advised. "People who've never been in an abusive relationship can't understand, and people who have usually recognized the courage it took." Through it all, Maggie kept Sarah's drawing on her refrigerator. On days when guilt threatened to overwhelm her, when she questioned whether she'd done the right thing, she looked at that crayon sun and those stick figures holding hands. "I'm protecting her," she reminded herself. "That's what grandmothers do." December 10th, 2024. 8 weeks. Post-arrest Charleston County Courthouse courtroom, 3B. The same courthouse where Daniel had once argued cases defending the vulnerable, championing justice. Now he sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, having failed to make bail. He looked different. Thinner. Sober, with 56 days of forced sobriety behind him. His eyes were clearer but haunted. He'd aged 10 years in 2 months. Maggie sat in the front row of the gallery, flanked by Eleanor and Rachel. Behind her, Jennifer, Kate, James, Richardson, Dr. Hayes. And in the back row, supervised by a social worker, a small girl with brown braids clutched a stuffed rabbit. Sarah, her granddaughter, watching. Judge Marcus Williams presided, a black man in his early 60s with a reputation for being firm but fair. He'd seen thousands of cases in his 20 years on the bench, but few with this level of public attention. The gallery was packed. Media in the back row. Domestic violence advocates. Former students of Maggie's. Curious onlookers drawn by the article. Assistant Solicitor Maria Gonzalez stood for the prosecution, a fierce woman of 45 who'd built her career on DV cases. She had a personal stake in every case, having watched her own mother endure abuse for years before finally leaving. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Maria began, her voice carrying through the courtroom. "This case is about power, about control, about what happens when a man decides his mother is an acceptable target for his rage." She walked the jury through the evidence, photos of Maggie's injuries, medical reports, the timeline of escalating violence. "The defense will tell you that Daniel Thompson is a good man who made mistakes, that addiction is a disease, that he deserves compassion." Maria paused, meeting each juror's eyes. "And they're not entirely wrong. Addiction is a disease. Daniel Thompson was a good man once. But," she continued, her voice hardening, "addiction doesn't excuse assault. Being a good person in the past doesn't grant immunity for violence in the present. And compassion for the defendant cannot come at the cost of justice for the victim." She gestured toward Maggie. Margaret Thompson endured 3 years of escalating violence. She documented 11 separate assaults. She finally found the courage to press charges after her son beat her so severely she suffered a concussion and fractured ribs. And now she's here facing her abuser to demand accountability. Maria's closing words rang out. This case is simple. Did Daniel Thompson assault his mother? The evidence says yes. Irrefutably. Undeniably. Your job is not to decide if he's a good person or if he deserves sympathy or if addiction is a disease. Your job is to decide if he's guilty of the crime charged. And the answer is yes. The defense attorney Thomas Webb, a public defender in his 50s with kind eyes and a tired face, stood next. Ladies and gentlemen, my client is guilty. The words shocked the courtroom into silence. He doesn't deny assaulting his mother. He doesn't deny causing her terrible injuries. He doesn't deny that what he did was wrong, criminal, and inexcusable. Webb paused, letting that sink in. So what are we doing here? Why are we having a trial? He looked at the jury. Because guilt and punishment are not the same thing. Because understanding how someone became a monster matters when we decide what to do with him. Because Daniel Thompson, despite his crime, is still human, still redeemable. He outlined Daniel's history, Harvard Law School pro bono work defending victims, his father's death, the descent into alcoholism, the spiral that led here. The prosecution wants you to see Daniel Thompson as a calculating abuser. I want you to see him as a sick man who hurt someone he loves and needs help, not just punishment. 56 days sober, attending daily AA meetings, engaged in therapy. He's already changing. The question is, does justice require destruction, or can it allow for redemption? Day 2 of trial. The state calls Margaret Thompson. Maggie stood, smoothed her navy dress, the same one she'd worn the morning of Daniel's arrest, and walked to the witness stand. Her bruises had faded to yellow-green, but the damage was still visible. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. Maria Gonzalez approached gently. Mrs. Thompson, thank you for being here. I know this is difficult. It's necessary, Maggie said quietly. Can you tell the jury about the night of October 14th into October 15th? Maggie took a breath and began. She recounted every detail, the credit card charges, the waiting, the sound of Daniel coming home drunk, the vase shattering, the violence. He grabbed my hair and yanked my head back, she said, her voice steady despite the tears tracking down her face. Then he shoved me into the china cabinet. My head hit the glass. I remember the sound it made, like something breaking, but it was my rib, not just the glass. What happened next? He slapped me. My lips split open. I could taste blood. Then, while I was on the floor, unable to get up, he kicked me. Twice. In the ribs. Several jurors looked away, unable to watch her pain. Mrs. Thompson, why didn't you call 911 immediately? Because I knew my son. I knew he was a lawyer, knew how the system worked, knew he'd find ways to minimize what happened. I needed to be smart, not just brave. So I documented everything. I built a case. I made it impossible for anyone, including myself, to pretend it didn't happen. Maria showed the photos to the jury. Maggie's face at 3:31 a.m. brutalized and bleeding. The evidence was devastating. Mrs. Thompson, this wasn't the first time your son hurt you, was it? No. There were 11 documented incidents over 3 years, each one worse than the last. Why did you wait so long to press charges? Maggie looked directly at the jury. Because he's my son. Because I loved him. Because I kept hoping the next apology would be real. The next promise would stick. Because I was raised by a mother who endured abuse for 20 years without ever telling anyone, and I learned all the wrong lessons about what love looks like. She paused, gathering strength. But mostly I waited because I was afraid. Afraid of destroying him. Afraid of being alone. Afraid of admitting I'd failed as a mother. Her voice broke slightly. It took nearly dying for me to understand that protecting myself isn't failure. It's survival. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of someone crying in the gallery. Day 3. Surprise defense. Witness. The defense called Father Michael O'Brien to the stand. He was 72 with white hair and the weathered kindness of someone who'd spent decades hearing confessions. He'd been the chaplain at Charleston County Detention Center for 20 years. Father O'Brien Webb began. You've been visiting Daniel Thompson in jail since his arrest. Can you describe those visits? Yes. I've met with Daniel 3 times a week for the past 8 weeks. We've discussed his addiction, his relationship with his mother, his actions, and his path forward. In your professional opinion, has Daniel shown genuine remorse? Maria objected. Calls for speculation. Overruled, Judge Williams said. The witness may answer within his area of expertise. Father Michael looked at the jury. I've been a priest for 45 years. I've heard thousands of confessions. I've counseled murderers, thieves, addicts, abusers. I've learned to distinguish between performative remorse, saying what you think people want to hear, and genuine transformation. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Daniel Thompson came to me 6 weeks ago, broken. Not because he was caught, but because he'd finally seen himself clearly. He'd written letters to his mother, letters he never sent because of the restraining order. He attended every AA meeting offered at the jail. He started therapy, but more importantly, he stopped making excuses. What do you mean? When we first met, Daniel wanted to talk about his father's death, his addiction, his stress, reasons for what he did. By our 4th meeting, he'd stopped using those words. He started saying, I chose violence. The alcohol was an excuse, not a reason. I hurt someone who loved me, and nothing justifies that. Father Michael pulled out a letter. Your Honor, may I read something Daniel wrote? Objection, Maria said. This is self-serving. I'll allow it, Judge Williams said. But briefly, Father. Father Michael read, Father Michael, you asked me to write down what I'd say to my mother if I could. Here it is, Mom. I'm sorry. Those words are inadequate, I know. But they're true. I'm sorry for the pain. Sorry for the fear. Sorry for destroying your trust and your safety and your peace. You saved my life by pressing charges. I know you don't believe that. I know you think you destroyed me, but you didn't. You stopped me from destroying myself, and possibly from killing you. I'm 56 days sober, the longest I've been sober since Dad died. Every day I attend AA. Every day I go to therapy. Every day I think about the monster I became and the man I want to be again. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I hope you'll believe this. I'm changing, not because I have to, though I do, but because I finally saw myself through your eyes and couldn't stand what I saw. If I could take it back, I would. But I can't. So instead, I'm going to spend the rest of my life becoming someone worthy of the love you gave me, even if you never give it again. Your son always. Daniel. The courtroom was silent. Several jurors were crying. Webb turned to the jury. The prosecution is right that Daniel committed a terrible crime, but Father Michael's testimony shows he's not beyond redemption. That treatment combined with accountability might save him and potentially save future victims. But then Maria stood for cross-examination. Father O'Brien, you've painted a compelling picture of Daniel's transformation, but I have one question. Have you met with Jennifer Thompson, Daniel's ex-wife? Father Michael frowned. No. Have you spoken with Sarah Thompson, his 9-year-old daughter? No. Then let me tell you what Daniel didn't mention in his beautiful letter. Maria's voice hardened. Daniel has a history of violence. He assaulted Jennifer 3 times during their marriage. He shoved her while she was 8 months pregnant. He terrorized her so badly she fled to Atlanta and cut off all contact. She pulled out documents. Jennifer filed 3 police reports, got a restraining order, got full custody with only supervised visitation because the court deemed Daniel a danger to his child. Father Michael looked shocked. So yes, Maria continued, Daniel may have shown you remorse. He may have written pretty letters, but he's had 8 weeks to craft a redemption narrative. Meanwhile, he spent 3 years terrorizing his mother, and before that, he spent 3 years terrorizing his wife. She faced the jury. Redemption is possible, but it doesn't erase accountability, and it doesn't mean the victim has to forgive or trust or take on the burden of her abuser's rehabilitation. Day 4, the breaking point. The prosecution calls Sarah Thompson. A ripple went through the courtroom. Daniel's head snapped up, his face going pale. Your Honor, Webb objected immediately. She's 9 years old. This is inappropriate. The child will testify via closed-circuit television, Judge Williams ruled. Only attorneys, court personnel, and the judge will be in the room with her. The testimony will be broadcast to the courtroom. In a separate room, Sarah sat in a chair that was too big for her, clutching her stuffed rabbit. A child psychologist sat beside her for support. On the screen, the courtroom could see her small face, her serious brown eyes. Maria spoke gently. Hi, Sarah. My name is Maria. I'm a lawyer. Do you know what a lawyer does? They help people, Sarah said in a small voice. That's right. I'm trying to help people understand some things. Is that okay? Sarah nodded. Sarah, do you remember your daddy? Yes. Can you tell me what you remember about him? Sarah's hands tightened on her rabbit. He was scary sometimes. What do you mean by scary? He yelled a lot, really loud. He threw things. Once he broke all the plates in the kitchen and Mommy cut her foot on the glass. Did your daddy ever yell at you? No, but he yelled at Mommy, and I could hear it from my room, and I was scared he would hurt her. Did you ever see your daddy hurt your mommy? Sarah nodded, tears starting. He pushed her. When she was pregnant with my baby brother, but the baby never came. Mommy said we had to leave, that it wasn't safe. How did that make you feel? Scared and sad, because I love my daddy, but I don't want him to hurt people. Maria showed Sarah a photo. Do you know who this is? That's Grandma Maggie. I never met her, but Mommy showed me pictures. Sarah, your grandma got hurt. Did you know that? Yes, Mommy told me. She said Daddy hurt Grandma like he hurt Mommy. How did that make you feel? Sarah's voice broke. I was scared for Grandma, and I was glad she was brave. Mommy said Grandma told the truth even though it was hard. I want to be brave like Grandma. In the courtroom, Maggie was openly weeping. Daniel had his head in his hands. Sarah, do you want to see your daddy? The little girl looked directly at the camera as if she could see her father through the screen. I love my daddy, she said carefully like she'd practiced. But I'm scared of him, and I don't think I should see him until he's not scary anymore. Day 5, Maria Gonzalez stood before the jury, her voice ringing with conviction. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard compelling testimony. You've seen evidence of Daniel Thompson's good qualities, his intelligence, his past generosity. You've heard about his addiction, his grief, his remorse, and all of that is true. She paused. But none of it excuses what he did. Addiction doesn't give you permission to beat your mother. Grief doesn't justify terrorizing your wife. And remorse, no matter how genuine, doesn't erase the crime. She pointed to the evidence photos. Margaret Thompson could have died. Her injuries were severe enough that she required hospitalization. Her 9-year-old granddaughter is traumatized not just from her father's violence toward her mother, but from learning he did the same thing to her grandmother. Maria's voice softened. Redemption is possible. I believe that. But it cannot come at the cost of accountability. If we let Daniel Thompson walk away because he's sorry, because he's getting treatment, because he wrote beautiful letters from jail, what message does that send to every other abuser? That if you're educated enough, remorseful enough, you can hurt people without consequence. She shook her head. No, justice demands more. Margaret Thompson deserves more. Find him guilty. Hold him accountable. That's how redemption actually begins. Thomas Webb stood for the defense, his expression weary but determined. Members of the jury, I won't insult your intelligence by denying Daniel's guilt. He hurt his mother. He terrorized his ex-wife. He traumatized his daughter. These are facts. He looked at Daniel, then back at the jury. But the question before you isn't just about guilt. It's about what justice looks like. Does it look like destroying a man who's already destroyed himself? Or does it look like requiring accountability while allowing space for rehabilitation? Webb outlined the sentencing options, the mandatory treatment programs, the supervision requirements. Daniel Thompson has been sober for 60 days. He's engaged in therapy. He's acknowledged his crimes without excuse. He's transforming. The question is, do we support that transformation, or do we throw him away? I ask you to find him guilty, he is. But I also ask you to recommend treatment-focused sentencing, to give him the chance to become the man his daughter described, not scary anymore. Reformed. Safe. 4 hours later, the jury filed back in their faces, serious. Maggie gripped Eleanor's hand so tightly she could feel bones grinding. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Williams asked. We have, Your Honor. The foreperson stood a woman in her 50s who'd taken copious notes throughout the trial. On the charge of domestic violence of a high and aggravated nature, how do you find we find the defendant guilty? Daniel closed his eyes. Maggie felt the words settle into her chest. Validation, grief, relief, pain, all tangled together. Thank you. Sentencing will be held in 2 weeks. Defendant remanded to custody until that time. As the bailiff led Daniel away, he turned to look at Maggie one last time. Their eyes met across the courtroom. She saw tears, shame, and something else, maybe acceptance. Maybe the beginning of understanding. She nodded once. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. December 22nd, 2024. Judge Williams looked at the sentencing guidelines, the victim impact statements, the recommendations from both sides. Mr. Thompson, please stand. Daniel rose, flanked by his public defender. I've presided over hundreds of domestic violence cases, Judge Williams began. I've seen the cycle of violence, the pattern of escalation, the tragedy that results when we fail to intervene. Your case is both typical and exceptional. He paused, looking at Daniel directly. Typical because you followed the classic pattern: grief, leading to addiction, leading to violence. Exceptional because your victim, your own mother, had the courage to break that cycle, despite every reason to stay silent. You were given every advantage education, profession, loving family. You squandered it all. Worse, you weaponized your intelligence and legal knowledge against the woman who gave you life. Daniel's face was impassive, but tears tracked down his cheeks. However, Judge Williams continued, I've also reviewed the evidence of your rehabilitation, 68 days sober, consistent therapy attendance, genuine remorse. These factors matter. He delivered the sentence, 5 years in the South Carolina Department of Corrections. However, the final 3 years are suspended contingent upon successful completion of the following: 18 months in an inpatient substance abuse treatment facility, 52 weeks of court-mandated anger management, completion of a domestic violence intervention program, 3 years supervised probation upon release, permanent restraining order, no contact with Margaret Thompson except through a court-appointed mediator and only if Mrs. Thompson consents. No unsupervised contact with Sarah Thompson until she turns 18 and requests it herself. Restitution of $15,347 for medical bills and property damage. Judge Williams set down his gavel. Mr. Thompson, you have a chance at redemption. Whether you take it is up to you. But know this, if you violate any term of your probation, if you engage in any violent behavior, if you fail to complete your treatment, you will serve the full 5 years. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Daniel's voice was hoarse. Good. This court is adjourned. The house on Trad Street looked different now. Same historic Charleston bones, same magnolia tree in the front yard, same wraparound porch. But Maggie had made changes. The dining room had been renovated, new paint, new light fixtures. The china cabinet replaced with built-in bookshelves. She'd kept the table, though. That formal table where justice had been served 2 years ago. It held too much meaning to discard. The kitchen was entirely new. She'd gutted it completely, couldn't stand to cook in the space where she'd bled on the floor. Now it was bright and modern, with white cabinets and a cheerful yellow backsplash. On the refrigerator, Sarah's crayon drawing still hung faded but treasured. Next to it, a new photo of Maggie and Sarah at the Charleston Aquarium, both of them grinning at the camera. Tonight, Maggie was hosting dinner. The second annual breakfast verdict anniversary, though they'd moved it to evening because breakfast felt too emotionally loaded. Eleanor arrived first, carrying her famous peach cobbler. 2 years, Maggie. How are you feeling? Strong, Maggie said honestly. Tired, but strong. The others arrived, Rachel still fierce, still fighting DV cases. Kate, who'd won a journalism award for her series on domestic violence in prominent families. Detective Richardson and Officers Martinez and Park. Dr. Hayes. Father Michael, who'd become an unexpected friend. Jennifer and Sarah came last. Sarah now 11 and taller, more confident. She still clutched a stuffed animal, a different rabbit this time, but she held her head higher. Grandma! Sarah ran to hug Maggie, and Maggie's heart swelled. They'd been building this relationship slowly, carefully. Video calls twice a week. Monthly visits to Charleston. A grandmother-granddaughter bond forming from the ashes of trauma. They gathered around the table, and Maggie stood to speak. 2 years ago in this room, I found my voice. I chose myself over silence. I chose safety over enablement. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. She looked around at each face. But I didn't do it alone. Every person here gave me strength, support, courage. She raised her glass of sweet tea. To Eleanor, who taught me that love can be fierce. To Rachel, who taught me that justice matters. To James, Lisa, and Kevin, who treated me with dignity when I felt like I had none. To Dr. Hayes, who documented my truth. To Kate, who shared it with the world. To Father Michael, who reminded me that redemption is possible for everyone, even those who hurt us. Her voice caught slightly. To Jennifer, who forgave me for not believing her and helped me protect Sarah. And to Sarah, she looked at her granddaughter. You remind me why breaking cycles matters. You're brave and kind and strong. Everything I hope my story helped teach you. What about Daddy? Sarah asked quietly. The table went silent. Maggie took a breath. To your father, too. May he find the healing he needs. May he become the man he once was. And may he understand that love requires accountability. They toasted, ate, shared stories. Rachel updated them on the Sarah's Law that had passed the previous year, a South Carolina statute strengthening domestic violence protections, named after Sarah Thompson, inspired by Maggie's case. Kate showed them statistics the Charleston DV hotline had seen a 47% increase in calls after Maggie's article. 13 women had specifically cited her story as the reason they finally sought help. Father Michael shared news about Daniel. He'd completed his 18-month treatment program, was sober now for 26 months, working as a paralegal at a nonprofit legal aid office helping low-income families, attending AA meetings 3 times a week. He asks about you, Father Michael said carefully to Maggie. Not to pressure you, just he wants you to know he's changing. Maggie nodded. I believe he is, and I'm glad, but I'm not ready to see him. Maybe someday, maybe never, and that's okay. She'd learned that in therapy, the weekly sessions she still attended, that forgiveness was optional, that healing didn't require reconciliation, that she could wish him well from a distance without endangering herself with closeness. After dinner, after everyone had left except Eleanor, Maggie walked to the mantel. The antique vase was there, repaired using the Japanese art of kintsugi, the cracks filled with gold making the breaks part of its beauty rather than something to hide. It's perfect, Eleanor said, understanding. It's honest, Maggie corrected. It's broken. It always will be. But it's also stronger for having been broken and repaired. The gold doesn't hide the cracks. It honors them. She touched the vase gently. That's me. That's all of us who've survived violence. We're broken. We have scars. But we're also stronger. And our cracks are nothing to be ashamed of. Eleanor hugged her. I'm so proud of you. I'm proud of me too, Maggie said. And she meant it. That night after Eleanor left, Maggie sat on her porch swing watching fireflies dance in the warm October evening. Charleston was beautiful this time of year. The oppressive summer heat broke in the world painted in gentle twilight. She thought about her mother, who'd died with her secrets. About her grandmother, who'd endured in silence. About the cycle that had repeated through generations until she'd finally found the courage to break it. She thought about Daniel, locked in a pattern he was finally breaking free from. She hoped he'd succeed. Genuinely hoped it. Not for her sake she'd made peace with the fact that she might never see him again, but for Sarah's sake. For the sake of any future partner he might have. For his own sake. Mostly, though, she thought about Sarah. 11 years old, watching learning, absorbing lessons about strength and safety and love. Learning that it's okay to be afraid and brave at the same time. That sometimes love means boundaries. That you can hope someone heals while refusing to be their testing ground. Sarah would grow up different from Maggie, from her mother, from her grandmother. She'd grow up knowing that her voice matters. That her safety is non-negotiable. That women don't have to absorb men's anger like sponges. The cycle was broken. Maggie pulled out her phone and opened her photos. Found the one from this evening, all of them around the table smiling together. Survivors and supporters. A chosen family bound by trauma overcome. She set it as her background. A reminder on hard days of how far she'd come. Of how many people had stood with her. Of the morning she'd chosen herself and changed everything. 2 years. 2 years of healing. Of therapy. Of slowly learning to trust again. Of building relationships with Jennifer and Sarah. Of speaking at conferences, helping other women find their voices. Of being interviewed, of telling her story over and over until it no longer hurt to say the words out loud. 2 years of living without fear in her own home. That was the miracle, really. Not the justice, though, that mattered. Not the recognition or the award or the law named after her granddaughter, though those mattered too. The miracle was simple. She could sleep without listening for footsteps, could cook in her kitchen without remembering blood on the floor, could hear a door slam without flinching, could live. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Grandma, thank you for dinner. I love you. You're the bravest person I know." Maggie typed back, "I love you too, sweet girl. And you're just as brave. Maybe braver because you're choosing courage young. I'm so proud of you." 3 dots appeared. Then, "When I grow up, I want to help people like you helped people." Maggie smiled through tears. "You already are just by being you." She set down her phone and looked up at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere up there, her mother was watching. Her grandmother. Her father-in-law, Richard, who would have been proud of her courage, even as he mourned his son's choices. "I did it," she whispered to them. "I broke the cycle. I chose myself. I survived." The night breeze carried her words away up into the Charleston sky, where they joined all the other stories of women who'd finally spoken their truth. And on the mantel inside the golden-veined vase caught the last rays of sunset, its broken places shining like promises kept.